Hello, ELL students. This is Mr. Neal. This is the first lesson of week 5. Today, we will be reading a new story called A Secret for Two by Quentin Reynolds. Make sure that before I begin reading this story that you have it pulled up on your device to follow along, or that you follow along reading on the YouTube link as well. In this, I will be reading aloud to help with pronunciation, since some of the pronunciation is French. I will also be asking some questions and explaining some words as we go along. So I'm going to pull up the screen. A Secret for Two by Quentin Reynolds. Montreal is a very large city, but like all large cities, it has some very small streets. Streets, for instance, like Prince Edward Street, which is only 4 blocks long, ending in a cul-de-sac. A cul-de-sac, students, is a road like this that ends and it goes in a circle at the end and there's no end to it. It's like a dead-end street, but with a circle. That's called a cul-de-sac. No one knew Prince Edward Street as well as did Pierre Dupont, for Pierre had delivered milk to the families on the street for 30 years now. During the past 15 years, the horse which drew the milk wagon used by Pierre was a large white horse named Joseph. In Montreal, especially in that part of Montreal which is very French, the animals, like children, are often given names of saints. Saints are very holy or religious people. When the big white horse first came to the Provincial Milk Company, he didn't have a name. They told Pierre that he could use the white horse. Pierre stroked the softness of the horse's neck. He stroked the sheen or the shine of its splendid belly, and he looked into the eyes of the horse. "This is a kind horse, a gentle and a faithful horse," Pierre said. "And I can see a beautiful spirit shining out of the eyes of the horse. I will name him after good Saint Joseph, who was also kind and gentle and faithful and a beautiful spirit." Within a year, Joseph knew the milk route as well as Pierre. Pierre used to boast, or brag, that he didn't need reins. He never touched them. Reins are the typically leather part that the rider would hold in order to steer the horse. So Pierre is saying, I don't even need to use the reins. Joseph just knows what he's doing. Each morning, Pierre arrived at the stables of the Provincial Milk Company at 5 o'clock. The wagon would be loaded and Joseph hitched to it. Pierre would call, "Bonjour, vieil ami," good morning, good day, old friend, as he climbed into his seat. And Joseph would turn his head and the other drivers would smile and say that the horse would smile at Pierre. Then Jacques, the foreman, would say, "All right, Pierre, go on." And Pierre would call softly to Joseph, "Avance, mon ami," or "Let's go, friend." And the splendid combination would walk proudly down the street. The wagon, without any direction from Pierre, would roll 3 blocks down St. Catherine Street, then turn right 2 blocks along Roslyn Avenue, then left, for that was Prince Edward Street. The horse would stop at the first house, allow Pierre perhaps 30 seconds to get down from his seat and put a bottle of milk at the front door, and would then go on, skipping 2 houses and stopping at the 3rd. So down the length of the street. Then Joseph, still without any direction from Pierre, would turn around and come back along the other side. Yes, Joseph was a smart horse. Pierre would boast at the stable of Joseph's skill. "I never touch the reins. He just knows where to stop. Why, a blind man could handle my route with Joseph pulling the wagon." So it went for years, always the same. Pierre and Joseph both grew old together, but gradually, not suddenly. So, students, when it says that they grew old together, but gradually, not suddenly, that means they were getting old at a normal rate. It wasn't all at one time. So both Pierre and Joseph are growing up together, and they work very, very well with each other. Pierre's huge walrus mustache, like this man right here, was pure white now, and Joseph didn't lift his knees so high or raise his head as much. Jacques, the foreman of the stables, never noticed that they were both getting old until Pierre appeared one morning carrying a heavy walking stick. "Hey, Pierre," Jacques laughed. "Maybe you got the gout, eh?" Students, gout is an illness that causes a lot of pain and makes it very hard to move. And usually only elderly people get this illness. So Jacques, the foreman, the boss, is seeing Pierre and saying, "Oh, maybe you have the gout, right?" He's trying to make a joke. "Mais oui, Jacques." "That's right, Jacques," Pierre said a bit uncertainly. "One grows old. One's legs get tired." "Well, you should teach that horse to carry the milk to the front door for you," Jacques told him. "He does everything else." He knew every one of the 40 families he served on Prince Edward Street. Now, says he here, is he referring to Jacques, or is he referring to Pierre, or is he referring to Joseph? We know who the person who is serving and delivering milk on the street is Pierre. So this is referring to Pierre. The cooks knew that Pierre could neither read nor write. So instead of following the usual custom of leaving a note in an empty bottle if an additional quart of milk was needed, they would sing out when they heard the rumble or the sounds of his wagon wheels over the cobbled street. "Bring an extra quart this morning, Pierre." "So you have company for dinner tonight," he would call back gaily, gaily meaning happily. Pierre had a remarkable memory. When he arrived at the stable, he'd always remember to tell Jacques, "The Paquins took an extra quart this morning. The Lemoines bought a pint of cream." Jacques would note these things in a little book he always carried. Most of the drivers had to make out the weekly bills and collect the money, but Jacques, liking Pierre, had always excused him from this task. All Pierre had to do was arrive at 5 a.m, walk to his wagon, which was always in the same spot at the curb, and deliver his milk. He returned some 2 hours later, got down stiffly from his seat, called a cheery au revoir, or goodbye, to Jacques, and then limped slowly down the street. One morning, the president of the Provincial Milk Company came to inspect the early morning deliveries. Jacques pointed Pierre out to him and said, "Watch how he talks to that horse. See how the horse listens and how he turns his head toward Pierre? See the look in that horse's eyes? You know, I think those two share a secret. I have often noticed it. It is as though they both sometimes chuckle at us as they go off on their route. Pierre is a good man, Monsieur President, but he gets old. Would it be too bold of me to suggest that he be retired and be given perhaps a small pension?" he asked anxiously. So this is a part of the story where we're slipping to a different focus. Jacques, the foreman, is talking to the president of this milk company and saying, "Would it be too much to just say that he can be retired and have a pension?" A pension is money that is given to people who retire. "But of course," the president laughed. "I know his record. He has been on this route now for 30 years and never once has there been a complaint. Tell him it is time he rested. His salary will go on just the same." But Pierre refused to retire. He was panic-stricken at the thought of not driving Joseph every day. "We are two old men," he said to Jacques. "Let us wear out together. When Joseph is ready to retire, then I too will quit." Jacques, who was a kind man, understood. There was something about Pierre and Joseph which made a man smile tenderly. It was as though each drew some hidden strength from the other. When Pierre was sitting in his seat and when Joseph was hitched to the wagon, neither seemed old. So when they worked together, they seemed to draw strength from each other. They supported each other, and neither of them seemed old. But when they finished their work, then Pierre would limp down the street slowly, seeming very old indeed, and the horse's head would drop, and he would walk very wearily to his stall. Then, one morning, Jacques had dreadful news for Pierre when he arrived. It was a cold morning, and still pitch dark. The air was like iced wine that morning, and the snow, which had fallen during the night, glistened like a million diamonds piled together. Jacques said, "Pierre, your horse, Joseph, did not wake up this morning." "He was very old, Pierre. He was 25, and that is like being 75 for a man." "Yes," Pierre said slowly. "Yes, I am 70, and I cannot see Joseph again." "Oh, of course you can," Jacques soothed. "He's over there in his stall, looking very peaceful. Go over and see him." Pierre took one step forward, then turned. No, you don't understand, Jacques." Jacques clapped him on the shoulder. "We'll find another horse just as good as Joseph. Why, in a month you'll teach him to know your route as well as Joseph did. The look in Pierre's eyes stopped him. For years, Pierre had worn a heavy cap, the peak of which came low over his eyes, keeping the bitter morning wind out of them. Now Jacques looked into Pierre's eyes, and he saw something which startled him. He saw a dead, lifeless look in them. The eyes were mirroring the grief that was in Pierre's heart and his soul. It was as though his heart and soul had died. "Take today off, Pierre," Jacques said. But already Pierre was hobbling off down the street, and had one been near one, would have seen tears streaming down his cheeks, and have heard half-smothered sobs. Pierre walked to the corner and stepped into the street. There was a warning yell from the driver of a huge truck that was coming fast, and there was a scream of the brakes. But Pierre apparently heard neither. 5 minutes later, the ambulance driver said, "He's dead. He was killed instantly." Jacques and several of the milk wagon drivers had arrived, and they looked down at the still figure. "I couldn't help it," the driver of the truck protested. "He walked right into my truck. He never saw it, I guess. Why, he walked into it as though he was blind." The ambulance doctor bent down. "Blind? Of course the man was blind. See those cataracts? This man has been blind for 5 years." He turned to Jacques. "You said he worked for you? Didn't you know he was blind?" So students, when it says these cataracts, if you see here in this man's eye, you can see that it's like kind of frosted over as if there was like ice or frost on his eye. That's called a cataract, and that impedes your ability to see. You can have surgery to remove cataracts, but that's something that you can do right now. This story is set in the past, so that was not an option. And so the doctor was saying, "You say he worked for you? Didn't you know he was blind?" No, Jacques said softly. "None of us knew. Only one knew. A friend of his named Joseph. It was a secret, I think, just between those two." So students, A Secret for Two focuses on this story of Pierre and Joseph, and we find out their secret at the very end. After completing this assignment, or after completing this lesson, your job is to go to Flipgrid and answer the question for this week. You'll be answering the question, and then you can move on to lesson 2, where we're going to be looking at some characterization of the characters in A Secret for Two. Good job. I'll see you later.